So we were so thrilled to bring this next guest to the Rail Talk studio. Can't think of anybody better to discuss a fabulous Breeders' Cup in Southern California. She's the on-air host, reporter, and analyst at Santa Anita, contributor to Sportsline as well as NBC Sports. Michelle Yu, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so glad to have you. This is going to be fun. So, all right, we'll analyze the Classic, take an overview of the Classic. I got to have a little bit of a mea culpa because I spent all year talking shit about Sierra Leone, and then he wins the Classic right in my face. However, I think we also have to acknowledge that he got a dream set up in that race with a crazy fast pace. He went 44-4 for the half mile, one of the faster paces you'll ever see in the Classic. And I think, in that regard and in that light, I thought Fierceness ran a winning race. I thought he was the better horse on that day, which opens up a really interesting discussion for three-year-old champion because they both had really good years. I think Fierceness was more brilliant at his peak. Sierra Leone was more consistent. Fierceness obviously threw in some duds along the way, but we'll get into that. I just want to hear from John and Michelle what your thoughts were on the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Well, since Michelle's our guest, I'm gonna give her the floor first. Go ahead, Michelle.
I mean, I feel very similarly, right? I think anyone that watched the race has to agree that Fierceness ran the best race, pressing into fractions like that. I did see, who was it? Maybe Kenny. Someone retimed the race and said it was a tick slower, still fast, but like 45 and change instead of 44 and change. So I guess you can take that into consideration, but still overall Fierceness ran the better race. You don't press into fractions like that and then hang around. And it looked like Sierra Leone was going to go right on by and Fierceness dug back in, which is something that we saw from him in the Travers Stakes, right? So if you watched him earlier on, you know that he was good, but he was also really finicky. And I think coming into this race, either Todd figured him out or he just figured himself out just from a mental standpoint. He looked like a bigger, better version of what we had seen earlier. And I thought it was really interesting. Mike Rapoli told me the morning before the race that he's really a late blooming 3-year-old, despite the fact that he was a juvenile champion. And when you watch his races at the end of the year, you can absolutely validate that. So while Sierra Leone ran a banger of a race, and I feel like we always knew he had it in him. I don't know, is it too little, too late? Like I know he won on the biggest day, but he also got like the dreamiest setup, and he's never gotten that before. Whereas Fierceness really showed that he's a legitimate, high-hearted racehorse here, in my opinion.
Right. And I think you have to look at a couple of things. Number one is that the race set up perfectly for Sierra Leone. And Michelle, Joe and I have been talking about, Sierra Leone in the Travers. I liked him. Joe didn't. I was wrong. He finished, third because things didn't set up for him. In the Jim Dandy, we've talked about it. But Sierra Leone was the favorite 5 out of 6 races this year. 5 out of 6 times the betting public had him down as the horse to beat in a race. And he only won the Bluegrass out of that group. So, it really is kind of like he was supposed to win some of these other races and just for whatever reason didn't have his A game. The races didn't set up properly, but this race set up perfectly for him. The pace collapsed other than Fierceness in those fast fractions. And then you look at Fierceness and Joe, I appreciate you saying you took me a couple on Sierra Leone. I need to do the same thing on Fierceness because I kept saying he's inconsistent. But if you look just at his 3-year-old year, the only clunker that he ran was the Kentucky Derby. He won the Travers, he won the Jim Dandy, he killed him in the Florida Derby, and the Holy Bull was his first race as a 3-year-old coming off a little bit of a layoff. And it's not that we ran Hades in that race. It's not that Hades is head and shoulders better or even in the same atmosphere as Fierceness. But that day, it just set up well for him. But if you take out the Derby and you look at Fierceness's line, it's really, really solid. I mean, it's really good. And again, he was always in the mix from the betting public, but he was never really the favorite in the majority of these races. So I think everything worked out perfectly for Sierra Leone. I think the fact that City of Troy did not like dirt one iota, that set things up for both of them.
Whoa.
What?
I still don't think he disliked dirt. I think he didn't like the kickback.
Well, okay.
That dirt. What are they kicking back at his face?
Yeah,
I think
dirt.
that if he had for some reason broken sharp and gotten good clean position, I don't think he would have spit the bit so bad. I think he.
But that's part of dirt racing.
That's true, but when you say a turf horse doesn't like dirt, I think it automatically means that there's oh gosh, I hate it like this.
Right.
And I don't think even when he was running behind, he never looked uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can see that. I think that that's part of dirt racing is like that there's going to be some kickback if you don't break on top, and that's kind of certainly didn't like running into it for sure. And there's great still shots of him all over the interweb of him like getting pelted with dirt, and it looks like if I get pelted with rain, it's like I'm gonna.
But also,
melt.
I bet you could find that same shot of all the other horses, but no one was taking those photos.
Good
like
point.
there could be photos of Next, or you know what I mean, looking the same way.
Yep. Although Next was so far out that
he was clean. He came back white.
He was clean, exactly. And I also want to talk a little bit about Forever Young because again, basically the horse was out pretty much since the Kentucky Derby. They ran him once in like a glorified, race for him to win, which he did. And then he came here and he ran a solid race again, and added a little spice to an otherwise kind of like a lackluster group of overall horses in the Classic.
I want to follow up on that thought just because I feel like the Japanese horses overall were a pretty big disappointment.
Yeah.
I know a couple of them ran well. They ran 2-3 in the turf, but they had a lot of short prices in other races that kind of didn't lift a hoof. So, it might be like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing because they've obviously come over and run really well and outrun their odds in previous years. So maybe next year will be different. One of the things that I like about the top 2 in the Classic is they're going to be back supposedly as 4-year-olds.
Yes.
And this is something we lament on this show and throughout the industry is that we don't have a robust older handicap division because these horses retire as 3-year-olds. And I love that it sounds like these two are going to come back and renew their rivalry on the track in 2025. I felt a little bit bad for Next, but as soon as you saw how far back he was, you knew he wasn't going to run his race. It's just not his style. But let's spin it forward to the 3-year-old discussion because there really is no clear-cut answer. And, there's some other, I think there are some other divisions that we'll get into. Maybe Horse of the Year might even be one of them where nobody really knocks your socks off. Somebody just has to win. This is a division that we've talked about all year is very, very strong relative to other 3-year-old crops. And you have 2 very deserving winners. Just go through the resumes right quick on fierceness. 13.5 length win in the Florida Derby, the 110 buyer. Won the Jim Dandy, beat Sierra Leone head-to-head. Won the Travers, beat Sierra Leone head-to-head. 3rd in the Holy Bowl, obviously was awful in the Derby, finished 15th, lost to Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone has run 7 times. He hasn't been off the board, so he's been consistent. He won the Risen Star, he won the Bluegrass, he was 2nd by a nose in the Derby, might have been best, was 3rd in the Belmont, 2nd in the Jim Dandy, 3rd in the Travers. So to me, it's all about what you value. You value brilliance or you value consistency. Because if you value brilliance, I think fierceness is the choice. But if you value a horse that shows up every single time in big spots, I think the right choice is Sierra Leone. I went into this thinking Sierra Leone was a little bit overrated. I've been swayed. I think the fact that he shows up every single time and that he beat Fierceness head-to-head, even though Fierceness had a tougher trip, I would lean towards him. I'm curious, Michelle and John, who you would vote for.
I felt like overall body of work, Fierceness showed a lot. And while Sierra Leone was very consistent, he was just kind of never punching it through when he was expected to, right? We know Fierceness had the big flop in the Derby, but otherwise I think he put together a very compelling campaign. It's definitely a competition where whatever one wins, you're like, I see it.
Yeah.
The other thing, sorry, John, real quick to jump into the other thing that I love about Fierceness is we talked in the spring about how he seemed like a little bit faint-hearted, where if things didn't go absolutely his way, he was going to pack it in. I thought he proved that wrong definitively in his last 3 races, especially the Classic, and showed that, he's able to run with adverse conditions. Now you could say, I saw Tinky say this, you could say he's still got an outside clear trip, but he was running fast as hell and he had every reason to pack it in and finish, 10th, beating 13 lengths. He still tried all the way to the wire. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Right. And I guess the other thing that I'd throw in there, again, just for discussion purposes is, there is a 3-year-old out there that ran 7 times, won 5 grade 1s this year, and beat the horse that won the Classic, and that's Thorpedo Anna. You got to make a case that technically she could also be 3-year-old of the year, or at least in the discussion. I know she ran 3 races.
3-year-old males. Are we doing this again?
I know. But still, I still think that she arguably is the best 3-year-old in the country.
But that's not the name of the award. We did this last year.
We have a division for
best 3-year-old filly award.
I know. But if
it was just 3-year-old, you could say that.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying if there's just 3-year-olds, if you're saying who's the best 3-year-old in the country, not who's going to win the Eclipse. I'm saying if there's the best 3-year-old in the country, I would make a case that it would be Thorpedo Anna.
Well, that leads me to the horse of the year discussion. Do you think that there's anybody else who has a legitimate claim to horse of the year? Because I don't.
No, I mean, maybe as a dark horse, you could have said before the Classic, you could have said that it was, maybe next because of all the marathon races he was running, but they were all like grade 3s and listed. Right? I'm just throwing like outliers out there.
Thank you.
But for the most part, I mean, Joe, we went through the Classic and we kept looking at, well, who's the older horse that's going to do something in here? Who's the older horse? And we were like scratching our head for one.
Michelle, you think there's any conversation about horse of the year?
There's no conversation about horse of the year. Thorpedo Anna stamped that. There should be no other entrant unless, like you said, you feel great about next. Like if Cogburn had won, maybe you could make a small case for him. But I honestly cannot believe anyone would consider a horse besides Thorpedo Anna.
For sure. And we were talking about this a little bit in the Rail Talk group chat. Like, this has to be the best 3-year-old filly campaign since Rachel Alexandra, no?
Thanks to Kenny McPeak stepping outside the box.
For sure. No, we always champion that. And I thought about Songbird, but she didn't win the Oaks. She did run second to Beholder. But I don't know. I think this was clearly the best 3-year-old filly year since Rachel Alexandra.
It would have been better if instead of the Cotillion, he ran her in the QE2, because when I had him on my podcast before the Travers, he said there was a really strong possibility that he ran her in the QE2 because he thought she'd love the grass.
Interesting. Well, that's what's another great thing is she's coming back as a 4-year-old. So we'll have time to experiment with her and see what else she can do. She's a joy on the track.